The room went quiet the moment the words slipped out, and nothing felt the same after. According to viral chatter spreading across social media, Rasheeda allegedly confirmed she's pregnant again with Kirk, a revelation that sent shockwaves through an already fragile situation. Fans say the timing alone made the moment explosive, but it was the reaction that truly stopped people in their tracks. Sources claim that when the news surfaced, Jasmine Washington reportedly broke down emotionally, overwhelmed by the implications of what this could mean for her, her child, and a past she thought she had already survived. Witnesses described the atmosphere as heavy, less like reality TV drama and more like real-life heartbreak unfolding in real time. What made this moment feel different wasn't just the pregnancy rumor itself. It was the history, the unresolved wounds, the feeling that just when things seemed settled, another chapter was being forced open. Fans immediately began asking the same question over and over. How much can one situation stretch before someone finally snaps? If the pregnancy claim is true, it changes everything. If it's not, then why did it hit so hard? Because either way, this wasn't just an announcement. It was a trigger, and the emotional fallout had already begun. To understand why this moment detonated so fast, you have to rewind through the emotional history binding Rasheeda, Kirk, and Jasmine Washington. A history defined by endurance, betrayal, and scars that never fully healed. Rasheeda's public journey has long been framed around resilience. She stayed when walking away would have been easier. She rebuilt trust when the ground beneath it was cracked. Over time, her image evolved into that of a woman who chose family stability over public sympathy, even when that choice came with judgment. That background matters, because any news involving her body, her marriage, and her future is never just news. It's a referendum on years of survival. Kirk's role in that history is complicated and unavoidable. Past mistakes reshaped how audiences view every move he makes, and no amount of time erases the memory of public betrayals. Even when he stays silent, his presence triggers assumptions. That's why any claim tied to him, especially one as intimate as pregnancy, carries extra weight. People don't just react to the present. They react to patterns they believe they've seen before. Then there's Jasmine, whose emotional reality has always existed on the edge of someone else's marriage. Her experience isn't theoretical, it's lived. When fans say she broke down, they aren't responding to spectacle. They're responding to the idea that closure keeps being postponed. For someone trying to move forward, each new development can feel like being pulled back into a chapter that never properly ended. This backstory explains why the alleged pregnancy confirmation felt like a rupture rather than an update. It reopened questions people thought were settled. It reactivated wounds that had been covered, not healed. And it reframed relationships that were already fragile. Whether confirmed or not, the idea alone was enough to destabilize the emotional balance everyone had been maintaining. What's important here is that reactions didn't come from a vacuum. They came from memory. From years of watching choices ripple outward. From understanding that, in this triangle, progress has always been hard-won and easily undone. That's why fans responded with intensity instead of curiosity, because they've learned that small shifts can trigger major consequences. As the backstory collides with the present, one thing becomes clear. This isn't just about whether a pregnancy exists. It's about what the possibility represents. Renewal for one person can feel like erasure for another. Stability for a couple can feel like displacement for someone still processing the aftermath. And that emotional math doesn't balance neatly. Because when history is unresolved, new beginnings don't arrive quietly. They arrive carrying everything that came before them and demanding to be reckoned with. The main conflict exploded the moment the alleged confirmation stopped feeling like background chatter and started reshaping real emotions in real time. What people reacted to wasn't a medical announcement on paper, it was the impact of the possibility. For Rasheeda, the situation instantly became about control of her narrative. After years of choosing privacy over explanation, the idea that her body and future were once again public property felt invasive, regardless of whether the rumor was accurate. The conflict sharpened because of timing. Just as the dust from past betrayals seemed settled, this claim surfaced and forced everyone to relive unresolved chapters. Supporters saw strength, another step forward in a marriage that had weathered storms. Critics saw repetition, proof, in their eyes, that nothing had really changed. Those opposing interpretations collided online, creating a pressure cooker where every silence was dissected and every expression overanalyzed. For Kirk Frost, the conflict followed a familiar pattern. Even without public confirmation, his name carried the weight of history. Old mistakes resurfaced in comment sections, reframed as context for the present. The absence of a detailed response didn't slow the narrative, it accelerated it. In the public imagination, restraint often reads as strategy, and strategy reads as guilt or calculation, depending on who's watching. The emotional core of the conflict, however, centered on Jasmine Washington. Reports of her breaking down weren't treated as footnotes. They became the story's pulse. Viewers who remembered her earlier pain interpreted the alleged pregnancy as a reopening of wounds she never asked to revisit. The conflict wasn't jealousy. It was the feeling of being permanently tethered to someone else's timeline. When closure keeps getting postponed, each new development feels like loss all over again. Then came the first shocking twist. Insiders began suggesting that the emotional breakdown wasn't triggered by the pregnancy claim alone, but by how it surfaced. According to online discussion, Jasmine was blindsided not by the possibility, but by learning about it through whispers rather than direct conversation. That reframing changed the story's gravity. The shock wasn't about new life, it was about old respect, about whether consideration existed behind the scenes, even when the cameras were off. This twist shifted the conflict from "is it true?" to "how is it handled?" Suddenly, the debate wasn't about confirmation. It was about courtesy and boundaries. People began questioning whether public figures owe private notice before public narratives shift, or whether fame erases that expectation entirely. The pregnancy rumor became a proxy for a deeper issue: who gets to move forward without explaining themselves, and who is expected to absorb the consequences quietly. As this realization spread, the story intensified rather than resolved. The audience split again, this time over ethics instead of facts. Some argued that no one owes anyone anything once relationships end. Others insisted that shared history creates lasting responsibilities. Both sides spoke with certainty. Neither could prove their case. Behind the scenes, the pressure mounted. The demand for statements grew louder, yet every possible response carried risk. Confirming anything would escalate scrutiny. Denying it could invite disbelief. Saying nothing would be interpreted as avoidance. The conflict had become a maze with no neutral exit. By the end of this phase, one truth stood out clearly. The shock wasn't a rumor. It was the realization that emotional consequences don't require confirmation to be real. Even possibilities can wound. Even silence can speak. And even a future-oriented claim can reopen the past. Because when unresolved history collides with speculation, the conflict doesn't wait for facts. It moves on feeling alone. And that momentum was about to push the story into a far more volatile escalation, where outside voices, assumptions, and loyalty tests would reshape everything yet again. The escalation began quietly, the way the most dangerous moments often do, not with announcements, but with whispers turning into certainty. As the rumor continued to circulate, fans, bloggers, and reaction pages began speaking about the alleged pregnancy as if it were already confirmed. Language shifted. "If true" disappeared. Reportedly became optional. The narrative hardened before anyone directly involved had said a word. For Rasheeda, this escalation felt like a loss of control. Her silence, long a personal boundary, was no longer respected. Instead, it was framed as validation of the rumor. Supporters defended her right to privacy, while critics accused her of letting the story run because it benefited her image. The truth sat somewhere in between, unheard. In this phase, restraint itself became controversial. Kirk Frost faced an even sharper escalation. His past made him an easy target for projection. Old clips resurfaced. Old accusations were reframed as context. None of it added new facts to the present situation, but it shaped belief. The more the story spread, the less it needed proof. History did the work for it. Then the tension centered again on Jasmine Washington, and this is where the second major twist landed. According to people close to the situation, Jasmine's breakdown wasn't only about emotional pain. It was about finality. The realization that, whether the pregnancy was real or not, the public had already moved on without her. The narrative no longer included her voice. She wasn't being debated. She was being decided. That recognition hit harder than the rumor itself. This twist reframed the escalation entirely. It wasn't a triangle anymore. It was a hierarchy of whose feelings mattered publicly and whose didn't. Rasheeda's potential future was treated as celebratory or strategic. Kirk's role was scrutinized but familiar. Jasmine's pain, however, was treated as expected, almost routine. And that imbalance triggered backlash from viewers who recognized the pattern. As a result, the internet split yet again. Some accused Jasmine of refusing to let go. Others argued she was being forced to relive trauma for entertainment. The escalation fed on that division, creating loyalty tests disguised as opinions. Supporting one person was framed as opposing another, even though the story didn't require sides. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere reportedly grew tense. Communication narrowed. Statements were drafted and discarded. Everyone understood that the next move, if any, would shape perception more than facts ever could. The story had reached a stage where reaction would outweigh reality. The escalation peaked when audiences realized something uncomfortable. Even if the pregnancy rumor were disproven tomorrow, the emotional damage was already done. The second twist wasn't about truth or falsehood. It was about impact without confirmation. Feelings had been triggered, relationships reinterpreted, and roles reassigned, without a single verified update. Because escalation doesn't need facts to grow. It only needs repetition, history, and silence, working together to turn possibility into belief. And with belief now firmly in place, the story was heading toward a public fallout that would affect everyone involved, whether they chose to speak or not. By the time the story reached this stage, the fallout had spread far beyond the people at its center. What started as an alleged pregnancy confirmation had become a public emotional reckoning, forcing everyone involved to absorb reactions they never agreed to invite. The audience wasn't waiting for facts anymore. They were responding to feelings, and feelings don't require confirmation to feel real. For Rasheeda, the fallout was layered. Support poured in from fans who saw her as a symbol of endurance, praising her for choosing stability after years of turbulence. At the same time, criticism followed closely behind, accusing her of benefiting from silence and letting speculation do the talking. That contradiction, being celebrated and scrutinized simultaneously, created a pressure that no statement could easily relieve. Every appearance, every post, every moment of quiet was interpreted as strategy. Kirk Frost faced a colder, more familiar backlash. His past meant forgiveness was never assumed, and neutrality was rarely granted. Old narratives resurfaced with renewed force, not because they explained the present, but because they were convenient reference points. The emotional fallout for him wasn't explosive, it was corrosive. The slow return of doubt, the reminder that history follows even when no new proof exists. But the most visible emotional impact fell on Jasmine Washington. Reports of her breaking down resonated because they felt human rather than performative. Viewers recognized the exhaustion of being permanently linked to someone else's marriage, of watching life updates become public milestones she has no control over. The fallout here wasn't about rivalry, it was about erasure. About realizing that your pain can be acknowledged briefly and then sidelined as the story moves on. Public spaces reflected this divide. Comment sections became battlegrounds of empathy versus judgment. Some called for compassion, urging people to remember that emotions don't operate on timelines or confirmation. Others dismissed the breakdown as inevitable, reinforcing the idea that some people are expected to absorb consequences quietly. That expectation, who is allowed to hurt publicly and who isn't, became one of the most unsettling aspects of the fallout. Behind the scenes, sources suggested relationships grew more guarded. Communication narrowed. The fear wasn't backlash, it was misinterpretation. In a climate where every word can be clipped and reframed, silence felt safer than clarity. Yet, silence also allowed assumptions to calcify. The emotional cost of that trade-off was felt by everyone. As days passed, fatigue replaced outrage. Even highly engaged viewers admitted the situation felt uncomfortable. The story wasn't evolving, it was echoing. Each repetition deepened impressions without adding understanding. The fallout had crossed from dramatic to draining, signaling that something essential had been lost along the way. Care. Because public fallout isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet realization that a story has consumed too much of someone's life without offering resolution. That realization lingers, reshaping how people see themselves and how they're seen by others. And with emotions still raw and nothing officially settled, the stage was set for a final turn, one that wouldn't rely on confirmation, but on the consequences of belief itself. The final twist didn't come from a doctor's confirmation, a public statement, or a dramatic reunion scene. It came from something far more unsettling. The story began to move on without ever being resolved. As days passed, no clear confirmation surfaced. No denial either. And in that silence, the narrative quietly shifted. What once felt urgent became accepted. The audience didn't wait for facts. They adjusted to the idea. That was the twist. Belief settled in before truth had a chance to speak. For Rasheeda, the moment turned into a lesson in how speculation can become destiny in the public eye. Whether the pregnancy was real or not almost stopped mattering. The assumption had already reshaped how people talked about her future, her marriage, and her choices. The story had written its own ending, and she was expected to live inside it. For Kirk, the twist felt familiar and heavy. Silence once again protected him from escalation, but it also locked him inside old narratives he could never fully escape. The absence of clarification didn't clear his name. It froze perception in place. In the public mind, uncertainty often feels like confirmation. And for Jasmine Washington, the cliffhanger cut deepest. Her breakdown wasn't followed by closure or reassurance. It was followed by quiet. The internet shifted focus. The rumor cycle moved forward, and she was left standing at the edge of a story that no longer needed her reaction to continue. That realization, that your pain can trend briefly and then be forgotten, was the most brutal twist of all. The cliffhanger now hangs in the air. Will Rasheeda ever address the rumor directly, or will silence remain her shield? Will Kirk speak to protect his present, or will history continue to speak for him? And will Jasmine find peace outside a narrative that refuses to let her go? The most unsettling part is this: the story doesn't need an ending to have consequences. Relationships have already been reframed. Emotions have already been triggered. Roles have already been assigned. So the chapter closes not with answers, but with tension. Because in this world, truth doesn't always decide the ending. Belief does. And belief has already done its damage, leaving everyone to wonder what happens when reality finally tries to catch up. This is where the story stops unfolding, and where the conversation truly begins. What we've seen around Rasheeda, Kirk, and Jasmine Washington isn't just reality TV drama. It's a real-time lesson in how rumors, silence, and emotional history collide in public spaces, and how quickly speculation can reshape lives without confirmation. So now, ask yourself, if you were Rasheeda, would you address the rumor head-on, or protect your peace and let people talk? If you were Kirk, would you speak to defend your present, or stay quiet knowing history will always speak for you? And if you were Jasmine, how do you move forward when every new headline pulls you back into a chapter you never asked to reopen? There are no easy answers here. What feels like closure for one person can feel like loss for another. And what the internet treats as entertainment often leaves real emotional consequences behind. Now, we want to hear from you. Do you think silence helped or hurt this situation? Was the emotional reaction misunderstood or inevitable? And at what point should audiences stop demanding access to other people's most personal moments? Drop your thoughts in the comments, but Keep the conversation respectful. Debate the situation, not the people. These are real lives, not just storylines. If you want more breakdowns that stay focused on the title, respect the people involved, and separate emotion from assumption, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because this story may be quiet right now, but unresolved chapters have a way of resurfacing when no one expects them.